The following show is brought to you in partnership with the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, Blue Star Strategies, Bright Road Incorporated, Make It Plain Podcast, and RPC Media.
From the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, this is State of Play.
Welcome to State of Play. Today, our topic is the challenges and complexities of HBCUs, historical black colleges and universities. I'm Sharon Pratt, and with me is Karen Tramontano. And joining us in a little while will be the Reverend Mark Thompson. And to begin the conversation, we have someone who is quite an expert, Adam Harris. He's a senior staff writer at The Atlantic, and he is also the author of a much-anticipated book, The State Must Provide. Thank you for being with us, Adam Harris.
Thanks so much for having me.
Could you just sort of give us the skinny, as they might say, about HBCUs? What are HBCUs and when did they come about?
So HBCUs are institutions that were founded predominantly after the Civil War to educate Black students who'd been shut out of the majority of higher education. You know, there was a big higher education boom in the mid 1860s after Congress passed a bill called the Morrill Act, which gave states funding to establish essentially the state university systems that we recognize today. And even now, HBCUs play an outsized role in educating Black students, and producing the Black middle class. 80% of Black judges, 50% of Black lawyers and doctors, 25% of Black STEM graduates come from these institutions, which only make up about 3% of the nonprofit four-year institutions in the country.
So President Lincoln sort of encouraged this along with, I guess, this new Republican administration in the United States government. But who picked up the tab? I mean, who really financed these HBCUs?
So HBCUs were financed by a kind of coterie of individuals. So it was private philanthropy, churches. The federal government gave HBCUs a big boost in 1890 when the second Morrill Act was passed. So the second Morrill Act was actually due in large part to predominantly white institutions needing more resources, needing more funds. And so within the debate that swirled around it, Black colleges ultimately ended up getting some money to establish institutions, because you had to remember it around this time, it was in the era just before Plessy v. Ferguson, but it was sort of in this moment of the South trying to establish and to write into law some of these laws that would effectively, cement what had been an unwritten rule before to segregate these institutions.
So most of the HBCUs, I thought, began with a strong focus on training in agricultural sciences. Is that a fair characterization?
That is correct. Most HBCUs were either normal schools, they were, agricultural and mechanical schools. And, that really grew out of the Morrill Act. The Morrill Act was designed, as a way to train folks who are going to be working with their hands, agricultural workers, in the same way that lawyers and doctors are trained. And some of the debate around the original Morrill Act, one of the lines that the talking points that came out, right, was we have these places to teach men how to be warriors, West Point. We have people to train lawyers and doctors and judges, but we do not have places to teach the teachers who will ultimately teach the students. And we don't have places to teach the agricultural workers, this mix of arts and sciences and how to employ a bit more knowledge in their craft. So that's that kind of original means of, this is training so that people can be self-sufficient and also be kind of more broader contributors to society was kind of something that was underpinning the mission of these colleges.
Right. There's so many questions to be asked, but I know Karen had some questions as well. Karen?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mr. Harris, explain, if you will, to our audience, why are HBCUs important today?
Yeah, so HBCUs still play an outsized role, as I mentioned, in educating the Black middle class. 80% of Black lawyers, 80% of Black judges, 50% of Black lawyers and doctors, STEM graduates, teachers. Even though they account for this small sectors, and one of the roles that HBCUs had initially played, right, was educating those who may not have received an education elsewhere. HBCUs still have an outsized share of Pell eligible students, so low-income students eligible for federal financial aid in the form of a grant. They still educate students who may not have been accepted elsewhere, and then propel them up the kind of socioeconomic ladder, right? If you look at these markers of how well schools are doing in terms of raising students from the bottom quintile into some of the upper quintiles of the socioeconomic spectrum, HBCUs routinely, perform really well in those rankings. And so their vitality and kind of continuing to perform that role is still and kind of remains critical.
What's the state of HBCUs today? I know there's several lawsuits. Could you walk us through what's happening?
Yeah, so there have been a string of lawsuits, going back to the early 1900s that have challenged that states are not equitably funding their HBCUs. Recently, in Tennessee, the state issued a report that showed that they had basically shorted Tennessee State University, the historically Black college in Nashville, between $150 million and $540 million. Maryland recently settled a lawsuit for $577 million, split between their 4 HBCUs over 10 years. And even for that monumental sum of money, Mississippi received a similar sum of money. The Black colleges in Mississippi in 2000, in the early 2000s, about $500 million split over 17 years between the 3 Black colleges there. Experts estimate that it's only a fraction of what is needed, right? An expert witness in the Maryland case estimated that they would need at least $2.73 billion to account for the historical legacy of discrimination. And so, this is kind of an ongoing saga of states needing to make amends for this historical and legacy of intentional discrimination in their higher education systems.
Well, we're going to get into this further with you because it's an awfully important subject and you bring so much insight to it. So don't go away. Come back here to State of Play. Welcome back to State of Play. And we have with us Adam Harris, the author of the much anticipated book, Why American Colleges Have Always Been Unequal and the State Must Provide. Let me ask you this question. Higher education is in the throes of recalibrating. The costs are soaring. Many of them are trying to figure out how to marry in-person with virtual class experiences. How do HBCUs remain relevant, if not essential, players in this very changed environment?
Yeah, so there are institutions, HBCUs, that are doing remarkable things and sort of innovating their way out through this kind of moment of radical transformation. Paul Quinn College in Dallas, Texas, for example, is one such institution, and they've implemented a work college model to effectively have their students graduate with very little debt. Each of their students it sort of works, and it helps sort of facilitate some of the campus operations. And then people are really looking at Paul Quinn as a model of what higher education could be going forward, a way to kind of revitalize a campus that had been struggling previously. When Michael Sorrell took over the institution, it looked as if it may close. And now they're moving on their way towards, financial sustainability. So there are a lot of similar institutions that are doing these sorts of things. But for a lot of public institutions, they won't be able to sort of do a lot of the innovating that they need to do unless the state and federal governments kind of account for these years of kind of systemic discrimination. But that's not our fault. We didn't establish a segregated, inequitable form of higher education. You all established that. And so by doing that, you need to fund the institutions which you established.
Well, I want to follow up on a little bit on what you're talking about. And to the extent that white institutions of higher education have benefited from slavery, Jim Crow, what do they owe the Black community? So
there was a conference in Mississippi a couple of years ago, and they were sort of exploring this exact question. What is the university's roles of Georgetown, Harvard, Brown, these institutions, University of Virginia, institutions that have looked at their historical links to slavery and systemic discrimination, but these institutions also operated within the framework provided by, state and federal partners. So it's not just that they were doing these things, it was that they were doing these things and it was allowed, it was legal. The title of the book, The State Must Provide, accounts for that. So yes, these institutions need to do that work of repair for their role in this, but at its root, this is an issue that must be dealt with by the government, a government that allowed this to prosper and allowed these institutions to legitimately sell people to save themselves. Georgetown sold 272 people to keep itself financially sustainable.
Well, you provide terrific insight, that's for sure. It's an important conversation. It's a critically important topic, and we're very grateful to you, Adam Harris, talking about HBCUs. So thank you so much for being with State of Play.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to State of Play. As you know, we're talking today about the challenges and complexities of HBCUs, and working with us and talking about it are Karen Tramontano and the Reverend Mark Thompson. And now we're going to welcome the president of the University of the District of Columbia, a state university, but also an HBCU, President Ron Mason. Great to have you with us, President Mason.
Thank you, Mayor. It's an honor to be with you today.
Now, I know a few people who have more passion, more commitment to HBCUs than you. I know you're a Columbia graduate, and that you did spend a part of your career at Tulane, but even then you were involved with Xavier. You were president of Jackson State University, Southern University, and now the University of the District of Columbia. From where does that passion come?
Well, first, when I hear that list of places I've worked, I feel older and older every time. Well, part of it has to do with where I grew up and the world that I saw coming up. But when I was at Tulane, I always felt like I was at an institution that really wasn't my institution. We did a lot of good work. Tulane was more colorful than it had ever been, either before or after. In fact, I was the first and last senior official at Tulane who was Black. But, as good a work as we did, I went back 20 years later to teach a class, and it was like I was never there. And so at the end of my 17 years, I decided to switch careers, in a sense, and work at HBCUs, because I felt like that was where the need was the greatest. That's where my skills could be put to the best use. But for the record, I think I'm more than just the 9th president of UDC, which is part of the history of UDC. I think I'm more like the 22nd or something like that.
Yeah, that would make more sense. Yeah, I know, but I did see that, and because we had minor teacher college, so that was well before, let's say, Howard University. You had minor teacher college. So, do you think that in this era of racial reckoning, that the role of, the value of HBCU is resonating more with the larger public? And how long do you think that'll last?
Well, HBCUs are hot today, sort of like Black Lives Matter is hot. I'd say yes, if you need a yes or no answer. But remember, HBCUs have never been segregated. HBCUs were brought about because they were not allowed, the students that we serve were not allowed to go to majority white institutions in America. And so in a way, we've sort of held America together while it's been trying to figure out how to get past this race issue. And I think it would be a mistake to act like there are not issues specific to Black people and Black institutions that we need to keep at the forefront of the conversation if we're going to have a future that makes sense for this nation.
So, Dr. Mason, let me probe just a little further. I think you're absolutely right. There's a moment of time, and then the white supremacist system takes right back over. So what should the federal government and what should state government be doing to keep these HBCUs front and center?
If you want to understand HBCUs, just think of them as institutional reflections of Black people. And the history of Black people in America has been that we've been denied the ability to accumulate wealth. And so if you ask me what can secure the future for HBCUs, it's the same thing that can secure the future for Black people, which is to find ways to enable Black people to access wealth, accumulate wealth, and be able to be full participants in what we call the American dream.
You're right, President Mason, and of course it's good to see you in terms of HBCUs being a hot topic right now. I've got a couple of questions. Number one, programmatically, at this moment of pandemic and police-demic and racial reckoning, what do you think HBCUs ought to be doing programmatically and academically, first of all?
The one thing that no one in America has wanted to take on is the issue that I think is the main thing that is stopping America from being the nation that we say we want to be, which is this system of white supremacy, which I define as a system that accumulates wealth in the hands of very few people, gives day-to-day advantages to white people and oppresses people of color. But in order to fix it, we need to understand it, we need to teach about it, and we need to engage in conversations about it, which is why at UDC, and I was surprised to see this, we're raising up a website called whatiswhitesupremacy.org. And I was surprised to see the domain name was still available, because you think somebody would have asked the question by now, right? And so that's the beginning for us. And hopefully we can build around that a knowledge base, and that will force the conversation to the forefront for scholars going from this point forward.
We've mentioned reparations, and obviously one of the things under consideration would be an infusion of capital into HBCUs. But the Biden administration is also talking about free college tuition for those who attend HBCUs. Would that help as well?
Sure, it would help. Our students at our community college at UDC, we're unique because we are a university system. We're one system under one accreditation umbrella. We're the only public university in the district. And so we do everything from workforce certification all the way up through PhDs and Juris Doctors. But 60% of our students are on Pell Grants. Look, we lost 500 students during the pandemic who didn't transition from high school to college. And the main reason was financial. They just couldn't get education high enough on their list of things to do in order to be able to continue their learning journey. And so if they had free tuition, that would have been one less thing on their plate. I might even go a step further and say, let's give them stipends for attending school and make sure that they stay on track and stay in school.
Amen.
Yeah.
So, President Mason, you seem to suggest that whatever we do, what we have to do as well is educate the broader public about the concerns and the unfortunate fallout of white supremacy in order to have a sustained commitment to HBCUs or correcting the system where we do have white supremacy. How do you do that in a country that is as polarized as is America today, a country where you had an insurrection on January the 6th. I mean, what is the path forward to do that?
So I always say the system of white supremacy for this reason. One of the ways that system works is to make sure that black people and white people, everyday black people and white people, keep fighting each other. I mean, that's one of the ways that they distract all of us from the main issue, which is that 10% of the population has 70% of the wealth, 77% of the wealth, right? And so I talk about the system because if you look at this website we're going to raise up, you know, it talks about how it produces, you know, poor white people and opioid addicts the same way it produces the challenges that black people have in America, right? And so I forget what your question was, but I think I'm starting to answer it. You know, it is a system. Oh, here's the answer. What do we do? Our strategic plan is the equity imperative, and the vision is that every one of our students will reach their highest level of human potential. And what really got us here is that we realize that that's an impossible vision to achieve when we live in a country that has everything that it does working to make sure that our students don't achieve their highest level of human potential. And so we have to take on the things that's in the way of our students reaching their potential if we're going to achieve the goals of our own strategic plan.
No, that makes sense. I love your resolve and determination. I just wonder, I mean, you've been on the White House Council dealing with HBCUs. I wonder, without running out of time, but do the other presidents share your point of view?
Well, you know, I'm planting the flag. And the thing is, you know, if it's on the table, what else can they talk about? At least that's where I'm at. But I have to tell you, I'm only here because this is where the work has taken me. I've done a lot and I've tried a lot and I've seen a lot. But at the end of the day, you got to deal with this. Otherwise, the rest of it is just coping and trying to figure out how to survive in a system that's not meant for you to survive.
President Mason, as always, you've given us great insight, and I love your energy and resolve and determination to address this issue. So we're so grateful that you participated on State of Play. Welcome back to State of Play. As you recall, our topic today, the complexities and challenges of HBCUs, and we have with us now Jared Carter Sr., who is the publisher and editor of the HBCU Digest. Great to have you with us.
Mayor, a privilege to be with you. Thank you.
So, you know, maybe you can give us, as they say, the 411 on what's going on in the here and now with HBCUs. How many have we now? And what are probably the one or two big ticket issues facing HBCUs?
The federal government designates about 100 institutions now of primarily 4-year institutions, as well as a handful of 2-year community and technical schools throughout the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. The big issues, obviously, you know, as we try to edge towards the end of a pandemic, what is going to happen with these institutions and enrollment in the years to come? A lot of families have lost jobs. A lot of families have lost revenue. Those are things that contribute to college access and attendance and completion. These are some of the things that we're going to have to revitalize and re-envision to make sure that our graduates, particularly from low-income communities, have a fair shot at college attainment and a real chance at a good job and being able to pay off loans in the future. That's issue number one. Number two is, even tied to the pandemic, what are industrial trends going to do and how will they be reflected in the workforce development and training that a lot of the undergraduates will be trying to pursue in their college studies? So those who are fortunate enough to be able to get into and through school, what are industries going to look like post-pandemic? This is primarily in hospitality and tourism, athletics, healthcare, which is a big, strong point for HBCUs. So these are things that are going to change the dynamic areas of study for HBCUs, but they've been persistent for 100 plus years, and we expect that they'll be resilient for 100 plus more.
Jared Carter Sr., how do HBCUs thrive and make it in a virtual environment, you know, because so much of the value of HBCUs is sort of that nurturing?
That's a good question, because a lot of research over the last several months have gone into, you know, how are students adapting to the virtual environment, and students overall don't like it. And Black and students of color particularly don't like it. They go to college for that one-on-one tactile experience with a professor. We enjoy the mentoring. We enjoy the discourse and the argument in class. And so that's tough to do when you're online and everything is being done by Zoom. Even if you can talk to somebody, it's not the same as sitting in an office. So these are tough questions. And I think that the HBCUs are trying to answer it. I think that the last year has taught us, if you're wearing a mask, if you're washing your hands and you're socially distant, you can kind of resume some regular operations. And so I think that the schools are looking at that because we just can't withstand the revenue hit anymore.
Well, you've just outlined, a significant role that HBCUs play, but it's state by state, institution by institution. How do we nationalize this issue so there is a national focus on ensuring the sustainability of these institutions?
I think with the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, the nation is awakening to a broader conversation about racial equity at large. So what started in these burgeoning conversations over the last decade about police violence and police brutality in Black communities has now broadened out to, okay, well, how can we make sure that African Americans and other minorities have equal opportunity at work, at political influence and participation, at education? So those things have naturally gravitated to HBCUs because for hundreds of years, they've been the places where all of those things have been in a cauldron of how to make for a successful Black middle class or a successful Black America at large. And so you've seen a number of public and private investments being made at HBCUs in historic rates, where you've had, donors like Mackenzie Scott, you've had the CEO of Netflix, Reed and Patty Hastings, investing hundreds of millions of dollars at HBCUs. That is contributing to scholarship opportunities for students, but it's also increasing the endowment at these schools. What does that help to do? It helps to increase pay and salary for faculties. It helps to address deferred maintenance. You can upgrade some of your buildings and some of your teaching facilities on campus. You get to make a stronger footprint in your geographic area in terms of inviting corporate and commercial space to make it more of a livable community for your students and for your faculty and alumni. So these are things that these investments are doing. The question will be, how do we maintain equity and how do we build upon it using HBCUs as a catalyst for the same?
Well, it was HBCU graduates who took the case of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka to the Supreme Court. And yet here we are in 2021. Very much sort of into what certainly Republicans call identity politics, where so much of the conversation and narratives and initiatives are focused upon, as they say, not equal, but equitable. How do you achieve equitable without dealing with some of the sins of the past? And is that the framework of the conversation about highlighting and protecting and preserving HBCUs?
Absolutely. They do a wonderful job of directly cultivating talent and intellect to address persistent issues of the day as they pertain mostly to African Americans and people of color in this country. So when we're thinking about educational access and development of K through 12, it's typically HBCU graduates serving as teachers and principals who are working to cure some of those ills that we find in those areas. Healthcare disparities, voter restrictions and political mobilization. HBCUs are at the heart of that. So we've seen in recent weeks, the state of Maryland, their legislative body reached a settlement with students and alumni from its 4 historically Black colleges and upwards of $577 million to resolve a federal lawsuit, which those students and alumni won, suggesting that programs were duplicated and created a separate but equal system in the state. You're seeing legislators in Tennessee and Texas do similar research to see how those HBCUs can be benefited. And as you know, here in the district, we've seen the city council make some substantive investments in UDC. You just had the president on that. That area is growing because of the impact and the opportunity it creates for working adults. So we're talking more about investment and the offshoots of investment, so much more than we're talking about the spirit and the culture bred by HBCUs. And that's a very good thing for economics. It's a very good thing for communities. It's a very good thing for politics. It's a very good thing for the United States.
Let me ask you, what do you tell our audience? What should they be doing? What should we be doing to make sure the focus stays where it needs to stay?
Send your students to HBCUs. It doesn't matter if you're Black or white. If you're a working adult and you want to complete your degree, consider an HBCU, either online or in person. Consider donating to an HBCU. Consider supporting athletics, men's and women's. We got to make sure that we emphasize that. All the things that an HBCU or a college community can do, these are things that earn your support and deserve your support. So get involved with an HBCU. If it's not directing a student, it's directing your resources to the things that can make that campus grow and opportunities around to do the same.
Well, you know, you really have helped us really get our arms around this important subject of HBCUs, which a lot of people, black and white, didn't know much about until Kamala Harris was put on the ticket for Vice President of the United States of America. You know, I was surprised at how much it meant to me when she became the nominee on the ticket as also an HBCU graduate. It's given sort of a laser focus and enthusiasm from white and black communities. And in this era of racial reckoning, we don't know how long it'll last, hopefully HBCUs will be front and center. Thanks for being a part of State of Play.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the next one.
Welcome back to State of Play. As you know, our topic today is the challenges and complexities of HBCUs, historical black colleges and universities. And with us now is a very special guest. He is the 12th president of Morehouse College. Welcome, President David Thomas.
Thank you, Mayor Pratt. It's great to be here with you.
Well, you have an extraordinary career, and I think you can provide terrific insight on the importance of HBCUs. Now, for many years, you were with Harvard University within the B School. You were at Georgetown University as the Dean of McDonough. You were at Wharton, and yet you've decided at this juncture in your career to take on Morehouse. Why Morehouse? Why an HBCU?
Morehouse for a few reasons. First is romantic. From the time I was 10 years old, I wanted to come to Morehouse College because I read that Martin Luther King had come to Morehouse. In 1973, I applied to 2 colleges. One was Morehouse. The other was a college I had barely heard of called Yale. I got into both, and Morehouse didn't give me any money, and Yale gave me a full ride. And my father said, I don't have any money, you don't have any money. Morehouse didn't give you any money. I taught you to add, follow the money.
Well, that's a good reason.
Otherwise, I would have been at Morehouse 50 years ago. So it took me 50 years to get here, and I got here. The other reason is at the time I came to Morehouse, I thought they had a set of needs that my combination of experiences could help them meet, and that if I was as successful here as I'd been in the rest of my career, I could make a difference greater than the difference I could make doing anything else.
Well, now you've had a heavy emphasis on diversity in corporate America, a lot of leadership around that. I think you were organizational behavior PhD from Yale University, and you've applied that skill set at Harvard, Georgetown, and elsewhere. Why a college to zero in possibly on meeting that need?
First of all, you know, even though we are a college singularly devoted to the education of men and 95% black men, there's a tremendous amount of diversity within that community. So the same skills and perspectives that I brought to those other institutions, I've also brought here. We have men from different countries. The class differences represent the entire spectrum of the Black community. And then there's our relationship to the broader community, where Morehouse men are sought after by companies and institutions that are interested in having more diversity. We're the largest feeder of Black men to Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School, for example. So those same skills and perspectives about diversity apply here, as well as they've applied to the other places I've been.
Considering the percentage of people that HBCUs typically educate, the percentages in terms of success is really extraordinary. I think 65% of physicians, black physicians in America, have come from HBCUs. I think 50% of the lawyers have come from HBCUs. I think a huge percentage of members of the Congressional Black Caucus are HBCU graduates. And it seems a trend that continues. Why is that?
I think it's because in these environments, young people in the most critical years of their adult development develop a sense of possibility. And I see it in Morehouse every day, of confidence in what they can do. And they also develop a sense of obligation to do something for their communities. And you put those things together and you create young people just enter the world wanting to make a difference.
Well, you know, I know all universities, all colleges, as a result of COVID, are really feeling the pressure, probably due to other forces as well, and HBCUs in particular. And I've seen where you've had to make some tough decisions about furloughs and cuts. But when you made that decision, you said something that I found very interesting. You said this is merely accelerating a trend that is underway, and we have to be ready to accommodate and navigate those forces of change. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. We see across the country, not just with HBCUs, that the tuition-dependent model of liberal arts education is not sustainable. And we have to adjust our economics to our reality, and also move in new directions to create new and alternative streams of revenue that are consistent with our mission. So, for example, we've announced that Morehouse will launch, beginning this August, an online degree completion program. It's only been public now for 2 months, and we already have 2,000 applications. And it turns out that there are 3.4 million Black men in this country who have some college credit but have never finished a college degree. And if we think about that in economic terms, the difference between finishing high school and finishing college is over $1 million in income, not to mention 80% of jobs that are advertised today require a college degree. And so we see this as advancing our mission.
President Thomas, you've done a great job of raising money, really an exceptional job. A lot of it has come from very successful African Americans, but there's still a limited number of successful African Americans who have that kind of wealth. But you've also been able to attract people like Mackenzie Scott, who have also contributed to Morehouse and other distinguished HBCUs. Do you think this era of racial reckoning inspires that sort of thing?
I think there's no question that the moment that we've been in, the combination of two pandemics being recognized, the COVID pandemic, but also the pandemic that's been with us for 4 decades, which is the pandemic of systemic racism. That's created a moment where philanthropists, both Black, who are limited, and white, have begun to look at what institutions can they invest in that address the underlying causes of these inequalities. I would also say that what we've seen at Morehouse is that what it's led to is individuals who had given us significant gifts previously, like Reed Hastings and his wife, Patty Quillen, founders of Netflix, said, what would it mean for us to give to Morehouse at a level of its contribution to society? And they went from a 7-figure gift of roughly $2 million to then give us $40 million. 8-figure gifts are not uncommon for predominantly white institutions with a track record of developing leaders and contributing to society like Morehouse. And the other thing they all have in common that we don't have in common is they all have multi-billion-dollar endowments, and Morehouse doesn't. So if we were giving to Morehouse at the level of its contribution to society, we would have a multi-billion-dollar endowment.
It's amazing the success that HBCUs have enjoyed.
A braggadocio for Morehouse College. We produce more Black men with PhDs in STEM-related careers than any other college on the planet.
Really, that's extraordinary. Well, one thing I know about Morehouse College is if it's true, I'll hear it. Well, you know, you've been terrific. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, but you've created a perspective, hopefully, where broader America understands the needs of HBCUs. Thank you so much, President Thomas.
Thank you.
Welcome back to State of Play. As you know, today we are talking about the challenges and complexities of HBCUs. We've heard from two presidents of HBCUs and two writers who have been providing commentary on HBCUs. And Karen and Mark, it seems that all of them of the mind, HBCUs are just as important today as were they when they were first established. But the challenge today is what it was when they were first established. Show me the money.
You're absolutely right, Mayor. And I learned so much from today's program and from our guests. One of the most significant things is that state governments intentionally did not fund HBCUs at the level that they were required to fund, despite the significant contribution that HBCUs were making and continue to make today. We've got to get that right.
Yes.
Our community would not be where it is today without HBCUs. The majority of African Americans who graduate from college, who go on and get master's and terminal degrees, who are in the workforce, have all graduated from HBCUs, so they're absolutely relevant. But there's something still wrong, because of those who have lost jobs in the COVID crisis, the percentage of African American women who've lost jobs in the COVID crisis is almost double of every other category. Whites, African American men, Latinos, and even Asians. So something is wrong. We need to undergird our HBCUs if that's where most of our students are going. We need to support them financially. Any study or commission to determine reparations and remedies must include infusing capital into HBCUs. But again, without them, we would not even be as far as we've gotten.
Well, there was an earmark, at least for HBCUs, in this last, I think, the American Recovery Act that President Biden and Vice President Harris advanced. Karen, do you think the Biden administration is going to make HBCUs a real priority?
I do, Mayor. I think the Biden administration is up to this task. So I think there's going to be more than just a robust discussion. I think this administration is going to take the steps that need to be taken to support HBCUs. And we need them now more than ever, especially after COVID. We need first-rate education, first-rate training for our citizens. And HBCUs have demonstrated that they've played a role in doing that.
But identity politics is what they call it, Mark. What do you think?
Well, you know, that's unfortunate. I don't like that term, identity politics. I don't think it's helpful. We've always known the importance of HBCUs. But in reference to the Biden administration, what's interesting, there's a healthy competition. The Biden administration keeps saying it wants to outpace any reparations discussion. So maybe that's a good thing. If the Biden administration really wants to do that, maybe they'll step up to the plate and get some things going even sooner until we figure out exactly what reparations are. So that's a good thing.
it's been a rich conversation, and I think we've underscored the importance of HBCUs as well as the needs of HBCUs. So it was a good conversation, and we're glad everyone was a part of it here on State of Play.